Hello and welcome. My name is George, and my channel is all about helping you get the most out of Logic Pro so that you can record and produce your best music in your home studio. Today's video is all about making the jump from GarageBand to Logic Pro. So if you're a new Logic Pro user and if you're transitioning from GarageBand, then this is the video for you. This is going to be the first video of a series of videos introducing you to Logic Pro and showing you all the differences and similarities between GarageBand and Logic Pro. It might seem daunting at first getting started with Logic Pro, but as you'll quickly see, there's probably a lot that you already know just from GarageBand that'll transfer over. And if you've never used GarageBand either, well, this is going to be a great introduction to Logic Pro too. So let's dive in. Okay, so for starters, when we open up GarageBand, this is what it looks like. So we're able to select different track types. We have a MIDI software instrument track. So this will be to play in instruments using our MIDI keyboard. And we have the drummer track. We have a microphone or line audio track and a guitar or bass audio track. Now, jumping over to Logic, we have a very similar list of tracks available to us. So again, we have our software instrument tracks, but now we have the added external MIDI possibility. Now, in most cases, most people aren't going to be using external MIDI. External MIDI comes into play, let's say, if you have some external sounds on a different keyboard that you want to control using MIDI, then you'd use external MIDI. But most people are just going to be using the software instruments that are included in Logic Pro or a third-party software instrument. Now, we also have the pattern track, which we don't have in GarageBand. And this allows us to create drum patterns kind of like a drum machine would, where we can input different notes on a grid. And I'll show you a little bit later how that all works. Now, next, in addition to the drummer that we have in GarageBand, we also have a bass player and a keyboard player. And those are very cool, and we'll definitely be checking those out. And then lastly, the audio, mic, and guitar or bass are kind of bundled into the one track, whereas they were separated out in GarageBand. Now let's jump back over to GarageBand for a second. Let's go ahead and just open up a software instrument. So go ahead and hit create. And now by default, we have this classic electric piano loaded in, which sounds like this. And in GarageBand, if we want to change instruments, we do this in the library here. So for example, the electric piano, well, we can change to different electric pianos here. We can try this phasing bell, perhaps. And if we want to change the instrument altogether, let's say to an organ, well, we can do that here as well. Now, jumping back over to Logic, we'll do the same thing. We'll just create a software instrument, and we can choose the instrument we want directly off the bat here. We have drums, sampler instruments, studio instruments, a bunch of synthesizers, and keys, or we can just go empty channel strip for now. And I'll do this just to show how you can load in instruments once you already have a software instrument track. So let's go ahead and hit create. So right now I have an empty track, which means I don't have an instrument loaded in. So if I'm playing my keyboard, you're not hearing any sounds. Now in Logic, there's a couple different ways to load in a software instrument. You can do it using the library, which is very similar to GarageBand. And to do that, we access the library pressing the letter Y on our typing keyboard. And you'll see that looks very similar to GarageBand. So again, we have, let's say, our electric piano, and you can see there's some of the same sounds in there. So that phasing bells sound, that's the exact same sound that we had in GarageBand. I'll also mention that you can open and close the library with this icon right here, in addition to just pressing the letter Y on your typing keyboard. So that's the first way of loading in sounds, and probably the one you'd be most familiar with. Now, the other way is to change the instrument on the track itself, which is right here. So one of the things you don't get in GarageBand that you do in Logic is this little channel strip here. In GarageBand, we have all our tracks here, and we adjust the volume and panning directly on here. In Logic, we have some additional features that we can see right away on this channel strip. So we currently have that electric piano loaded in, which is this software instrument right here that's called ePiano. And I can open up the actual plugin just by hovering over here in the middle where you see these little two lines. And I click on that, that opens up the electric piano. And through here, I can scroll through a bunch of presets within the electric piano itself. So if you go up here where it says custom, now I have all these other presets within the electric piano. And I can, of course, change all these parameters as well. Now I'm just going to reset this channel strip to show you the other way to load in some instruments. So if I go up here where it currently says phasing bells, I'll click on that. And I can go
reset channel strip.
My channel strip's now empty again. So if I play on my MIDI keyboard, I'm not going to get any sound. So right here, you'll notice it says instrument. And if I click on that, this is where all my software instruments are hiding. Now at the very top, you'll have the most recent ones that you accessed. And then down here are all the built-in Logic ones. And in the current version that I'm using, 11.1, it's organized like this by instrument, but in previous versions, you'll have a longer list because the drums aren't all grouped in one drum folder and the synthesizers aren't all grouped in their own folder. So if it looks a little bit different on your end, that just means you're on a earlier version. So we have the 3 different drum instruments. We have 3 different sampler instruments. And we have these different studio instruments, studio bass, horns, piano, and strings. And we have a whole bunch of synthesizers and the vintage keys like the organ and the electric piano we were just looking at. And then as well, there's also the drum machine designer, which pulls samples from different instruments. Now we scroll here where it says AU instruments. So this is where you'd access all your third-party plugins. So if you've purchased some third-party plugins like
the native instrument stuff, for example,
then this is where you're going to find all of that. But why don't I go ahead and load in maybe the Alchemy synth, for example? Now, personally, I prefer loading in my software instruments like I just showed you rather than use the library. And the main reason for that is when you're just loading in the instrument like I just did, you're not getting a whole bunch of different effects loaded on the track as well. You'll notice here below Alchemy, there's also a slot for audio effects, and it's currently blank. So I can add all of those on my own afterwards. It's not included in this patch, although there could be effects in Alchemy itself. But when I'm using the library, on the other hand, so I'll just go ahead and open that back up. Again, the letter Y. Let's say I go to synthesizer and I don't know, let's try EDM chord, classic chords. So now you'll notice on this patch, we have this retro synth, which is the instrument, but there's also this channel EQ now. We have this delay and this ensemble plugin. as well as this bus 1 send. So we have all these different effects that have already been added to this track. Now, for some, that might be helpful and just what you're after. But if you prefer to kind of tailor your sound a little bit and add your effects as you go, then you might not want to use the library to start off with your sounds. Now let's head back over to GarageBand for a second. So in addition to the library being the same, if you're used to using Apple loops in GarageBand, which you can get to over here, you also have the same thing in Logic Pro. So let's head back over to Logic. So same thing in Logic. If we go up to the little loop icon, now we have all our different Apple loops, and we can refine this list. As you'll see, there's lots and lots happening. So if you want to sort it by instrument, you can, let's say we want just some organ, we can click on that. That'll just give us our organ loops. And if we want to refine it by genre, then let's say we just want hip hop and R&B, that'll refine it even further. And if we like any of these loops, we can simply just drag them directly onto our track. So this area really looks quite similar to GarageBand. Now, before we go any further, there's a few things in Logic Pro that I suggest you do right off the bat. And the first is to go to your settings. So if you go to the Logic Pro menu, go to settings, and scroll down to advanced. And you want to make sure that enable complete features is loaded up. Because without it, there's a lot of features that get hidden, and it basically looks a lot more like GarageBand.
And you're missing out
on a lot of the features that you can use in Logic Pro. Now, under the audio tab, this is just where you would set your output and input device. So that would usually be your audio interface. So the output device is going to be how you're listening to Logic. So if you're plugged into your audio interface, that'll be our audio interface. If you're plugged directly into your MacBook, for example, with headphones, then you would see MacBook headphones. And then your input, this would be if you're using a microphone, which generally is going to be plugged into your audio interface, or maybe you have a USB microphone, and that would show up here as well. Your I/O buffer size. Now, this will depend a little bit on the amount of computer processing power you have. So basically, the higher the number you have set here, the easier it's going to be on your computer. Now, the downside of the higher number is you're going to get more latency. So what that means is when you're recording, let's say I'm singing and I'm wearing my headphones, I'm going to hear myself in my headphones a little bit delayed. So it takes time for your voice to get recorded, go into Logic, and then back out your audio interface and then hear those in your headphones. Now, if you set this to 32, then that latency gets cut down quite a bit and it's not going to be as noticeable. Now, the downside of having 32 is it's going to tax your computer a lot more. And depending how many tracks you have, Logic might actually crash and you'll have to restart anyways. So a happy medium is kind of 256, or you can go down to 128 even. Most computers these days would have no problem with 128. Now, the other great thing about Logic is you can actually open up GarageBand projects directly in Logic Pro. So if you have a whole bunch of old sessions in GarageBand, you can simply go up to Logic file menu and go open and just open up the GarageBand file, and that'll open up directly into Logic Pro. And then you can continue working on your project in Logic and have access to all the expanded instruments and effects that you'd find in Logic Pro. So we've gone over some of the familiar things between GarageBand and Logic Pro. Now let's look at some of the new things that you're getting with Logic Pro. One of the biggest things for me is you get a dedicated mixer window. And I can open that up using the letter X on my typing keyboard or up here using this icon. I'm actually going to close my library for now as well and the loop browser. So in the mixer page, this is where we can load in our effects. We can adjust the volume and the panning, and we can see all our tracks in one go. I'm going to have a dedicated video all about the mixer page in coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. The other thing we're gaining in Logic Pro is a whole set of different tools that we don't have in GarageBand. So the pointer tool, that's basically the same as what we have in GarageBand, able to move things around.
Resize them.
The pencil tool will allow you to create blank regions and draw in MIDI notes. The eraser tool allows us to delete notes in regions. Text tool simply allows us to rename regions. So for example, I can rename this to simply organ if I wanted to. Scissor tool, this is one you'll be using a lot in editing, is you can simply cut wherever you'd like and delete or move those cuts. Now in GarageBand, you have to use the split feature on the playhead, which does the same thing, but just not quite as easy and quick as using the scissor tool. The join tool, if you want to join things back together, you can do that and glue them back together. The solo tool will allow you to isolate one region and just hear that. The mute tool, you can mute individual regions. The zoom tool, so we can zoom in quickly and out. The fade tool, if we want to create a fade. We can quickly create a fade like that. Now we have automation select and automation curve tool, and that deals with automation. We also had automation in GarageBand,
but we didn't have the tools
to create curves and things like that. So to access automation, hit the letter A on your keyboard, or you can use
this little icon
up here. So for example, if I draw in some volume automation, I can use the curve tool and create a curve like so. Now the marquee tool, this is very handy in both in automation and also outside of automation. So within automation, you can select an area and that'll create 2 points. So you can boost or cut the volume like that. If we get out of automation mode, again, hitting the letter A on our keyboard, and let me just zoom in for a second here. Using my marquee tool, I can have a selection and I can simply hit the delete key and now delete that. And I can undo by going Command Z. And now if I still have this highlighted, I can also make a copy. So if I hold down Option on my keyboard, I can copy that over without affecting anything from the other region. Now we also have the Flex tool.
So this allows us to actually move audio around
and manipulate the timing. We have the Gain tool. So this is kind of to adjust the volume of a region. So for example, this region, if I want to just boost the gain, I can do that. And you see how the waveforms got bigger there. So that can be handy if you just want one little area boosted. Then we have the Slip tool. So this allows us to scan through the timeline of the region. And then we have the Rotate tool. So this will basically shift the region from one side to the next. So, for example, this was previously the end of this region, and it'll show up on the other side if I drag it over like that. Now, some of the other features that you
gain in Logic Pro.
We briefly talked about the flex tool here. There's a whole another set of flex tools here. If you go to the show hide flex menu, and there's a whole bunch of different basically flex algorithms based on what type of material you're using. And all these flex times ones are used to manipulate the time. So if you need to stretch a note or shift it, you can use these different flex time algorithms. But there's also a flex pitch algorithm, which lets us pitch our vocals note by note. So if you need to fix one little note, you can do that using flex pitch rather than using something like auto tune, for example. Now, another handy feature is track stacks. So if you have a group of different instruments, so let's say I'll create maybe 8 audio tracks. And I'm just going to hide my mixer by pressing the letter X. So let's say I have all these tracks, and let's say they're all drum tracks, for example, and I want to just group them. They're currently all selected. You can do that by just selecting one, holding Shift, and selecting the last one. Now you have everything selected. And now if I right-click and I go to Create Track Stack, I recommend you select Summing Stack, hit Create, and now you notice this little arrow.
And we can collapse
and show all our tracks. So,
as I said, if you have a bunch of drum tracks,
you have, kick, snare, hi-hat, overheads, and toms all on different tracks, and you just want to hide those to make things a little bit easier, you can quickly do that. And then you can also adjust the volume for the overall track. So if I want to bring all the drums down together, I can do that on that one track. So that's very handy. Now, another thing you might want to do when you're first getting started in Logic Pro is looking at downloading
all the available sounds to you. So if you go to the Logic Pro menu and go to Sound Library, and you can go to Open Sound Library Manager, this will show you
all the sounds that you have installed on your system and all the sounds you don't. So for example, if I go select all uninstalled, you can see that there's still 19 gigabytes of sounds that I could download, but you can also download them as you go as well. And if you, let's say you were running out of space and you want to relocate them to an external drive, then you can go back to Sound Library and go Relocate Sound Library. And you can select an external drive that would show up here and just hit Relocate. And that'll move all those sounds to an external drive. Now, one of the things that should be familiar is the smart controls. So I select my synth track up here and I hit the letter B. That's going to open up my smart controls down here. And these are the types of controls that you would have in GarageBand. So these are just kind of shortcuts
to
some of the settings that you'd find in the actual plugin. So for example, if I open up the RetroSynth plugin, you can see that this knob is tied to the release in here. So it's just a bit of a shortcut. If you don't want to open up the entire plugin, these are kind of little shortcuts to some of the more common parameters. So I hope that helps you get started in Logic Pro and shows you some of the similarities and differences between it and GarageBand. Next week, we're going to dive into all the different software instruments that are found in Logic Pro. So you'll get to familiarize yourself with the different sounds that are available to you. If you have any questions, please leave those in the comments below. And if you want to dive deeper and improve your workflow in Logic Pro, don't forget to download my Ultimate Logic Pro Starter Pack. This includes my Logic Pro session templates, my audio recording checklist, my mixing guide, my gear guide, and my Logic Pro hotkey cheat sheet. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.